Tomorrow morning your dog says something to you. Not a bark you interpret, not a whine you guess at, an actual sentence. Understood exactly the way you'd understand a coworker, and your dog understands you back. The change is simple. Every animal capable of intentional communication can now exchange meaning with humans, directly, permanently, everywhere on Earth. Not telepathy, not a translation device. The barrier that used to sit between species, the one that turned every animal interaction into a guessing game, is just gone. Bees don't get this. Ants don't get this. Anything running on pure instinct with no room for intent stays exactly as unreachable as before. But anything that already tries to tell you something, a dog, a crow, a pig, a whale, a parrot, can now actually tell you. For about 6 hours, this feels like the best day in human history. Then it starts feeling like something else. Because the first thing people notice isn't wisdom. It's how small most of it is. You brace yourself for your cat to reveal some ancient private interior life. And what you get is, the food bowl is in the wrong spot. And also, no, you may not touch the belly. That was a trap. It is always a trap. A parakeet has opinions about the curtains. A goldfish, it turns out, does not have opinions about anything. Because a goldfish's brain was never built to carry them. Talking didn't upgrade the animal. It just gave the animal's actual thoughts a microphone. And most animal thoughts are about food, territory, comfort, and whether the thing that just moved is dangerous. That's not a disappointment exactly. It's a correction. Humans had spent centuries writing animal interiority for animals. Noble, wise, secretly understanding everything. And the new rule doesn't confirm that story. It replaces it with something plainer and, honestly, funnier. Dogs are delighted and extremely undignified about it. They will tell you they love you in the same breath as demanding a second dinner they are not supposed to have. And they will lie about the second dinner having already happened. Badly, immediately caught. Cats say almost nothing unprompted. And when they do speak, it tends to be short, transactional, and faintly bored. Which somehow proves every joke that's ever been made about cats. And doesn't particularly bother the cats. Within about a week, My Dog Said becomes its own genre of video, mostly because dogs are terrible at keeping secrets, and cats have simply confirmed they were choosing silence the entire time. That's the comedy layer, and it doesn't last as the main story, because underneath it, something less funny starts to move. Farms are where the rule stops being cute. A chicken doesn't reason about its situation the way a person would. But it can now say, with whatever limited vocabulary its mind actually contains, that it's frightened or in pain or that the space is too small. A pig can say it doesn't want to go where it's being led. None of this is new information in the abstract. People who work in agriculture already knew, in general terms, that these animals experience distress. What's new is that the distress now arrives as language instead of behavior, and language is much harder to file away as ambient noise. A worker who has done the same job for 15 years, unbothered, finds it very different to keep doing that job once the animal in front of them is saying something instead of just reacting. Some workers adapt by treating it the way people adapt to any repetitive, difficult job. Compartmentalizing, going quiet, getting through the shift. Some quit. Slaughterhouses and industrial farms don't disappear, because the economics that built them haven't disappeared. But staffing them gets harder, turnover climbs. And companies start looking seriously at automation, not for efficiency, but because a machine doesn't need to hear anything. And this is where the rule creates its strangest economic consequence, because it doesn't apply evenly. Insects still can't talk. Shrimp still can't talk. An animal has to be doing something recognizable as intentional communication in the first place. For the new rule to give it a voice, and most of the smaller, simpler organisms humans already farm at enormous scale, we're never doing that. So the protein industry, almost overnight, gets handed a clean answer to a question it had been dancing around for years. Insect farming and lab-grown protein stop being the ethical alternative and start being the only alternative that doesn't require anyone to have a conversation with dinner first. Investment moves. Marketing shifts from sustainable to something closer to quiet. It's a strange kind of progress, not chosen because it's better, chosen because it's the one option the new rule didn't touch. Pet ownership goes through its own quieter upheaval. Not collapse, people don't stop keeping pets, but the relationship gets renegotiated in small, constant ways. A dog can now say it doesn't like being left alone all day, And that specific complaint, repeated by tens of millions of dogs, becomes something pet product companies can't ignore. Quieter vacuums get designed because half the dogs in the country have said, on record, that they hate the loud one. Daycare and dog walking businesses expand because dogs are, for the first time, customers with stated preferences instead of subjects being managed. Veterinary visits change shape too. A vet can ask where it hurts and get an actual answer, which makes diagnosis faster, but also means the vet now has to sit with an animal, clearly communicating fear about a procedure it can't consent to in any meaningful sense. Nobody solves that discomfort. People just get used to carrying it. Zoos face the sharpest version of this same problem, because zoos were always built on an audience's ability to look at an animal and decide it seemed content. That ambiguity is gone. An elephant can now say, plainly, that it wants more space than it has. Some facilities respond by expanding enclosures or shifting towards sanctuary models. Others simply keep operating because closing isn't free, and the animals still need somewhere to live. But the marketing changes quietly from "see the animals" to something more careful, because nobody wants to be the business currently being quoted by the exhibit. Wildlife management runs into the same wall from a different angle. A deer being tracked by hunters, or a coyote being trapped by animal control, can now say something recognizable as an objection. Not a legal argument, nothing that holds up his reasoning, but a clear communication of distress or territory or fear. It changes nothing about the practical problem of overpopulation or safety, and hunting and pest control continue, because the underlying reasons for them were never emotional in the first place. What changes is the experience of doing it. A new kind of professional starts to appear around this. Part wildlife officer, part interpreter. Someone whose job is partly to listen to what an animal is communicating before a decision gets made, not because the animal gets a vote, but because humans, once they can hear an objection, apparently need someone else to have listened to it on their behalf. The most genuinely strange discoveries come from the animals nobody expected much from in the first place. Crows, it turns out, have been keeping track of individual humans for far longer than anyone assumed, and they say so, casually, the way you'd mention remembering someone from a party years ago. Elephants reference specific deaths, specific droughts, specific paths their families have used for generations, information that was always technically there, encoded in behavior researchers had been trying to reverse engineer for decades, now just handed over directly. Whale communication is the biggest shift of all, because whale song had already been observed, changing, spreading, varying by population. Long before this, the assumption was always that something meaningful was happening in there. Now it's confirmed to be actual communication, carrying actual content, some of it about migration routes disrupted by shipping lanes, some of it about calves lost to boat strikes. Marine conservation stops being an argument made on behalf of an animal that can't speak for itself. It becomes closer to translation work. None of this resolves into a single dramatic moment. There's no summit, no unified policy, no instant collapse of animal agriculture or animal captivity. What happens instead is slower and much less photogenic. Millions of individual decisions made by people who now have information they didn't have before about whether to act on it. Some do. Most of the time, don't. Not out of cruelty, but because the economic and practical structures animals are embedded in were never built around what animals wanted, and one new channel of communication doesn't rebuild those structures by itself, which is really the whole shape of the answer. Before the change, humans got to imagine what animals felt, and the imagining was flattering. Animals were wise, or loyal, or secretly deep, largely because nobody could check. The new rule doesn't make animals wiser or humans kinder. It just removes the excuse of not knowing. The dog was always uncomfortable in the car. The chicken was always afraid. The elephant always wanted more space than it had. None of that needed animals to talk in order to be true. What talking did was make it impossible to pretend otherwise. And that turns out to be a much smaller gift, and a much heavier one than anybody expected. On the first morning, their cat had something to say.